Finally, here's our last question for this paired passage set. Which of the statements in passage 1 is an example of faulty reasoning? Again, just because the author has evidence doesn't necessarily mean it's valid. What is the flaw? All right, I'm going to give you a moment to pause the video here and to look back over this text. If you need to, feel free to use that reference page of those questions you should be asking yourself when presented with evidence. Match it up with an answer choice, and then we will discuss it. All right, so an example of faulty reasoning. Well, let's look at some of these. So the author says that these composites are becoming popular. Well, this is information that's been provided to us. We don't have any reason to disbelieve this. The author has some data. They're becoming popular for this reason due to their cosmetic appeal. So this is data that's provided in the text, and there's no flaw here. Now let's look at answer choice B. The use of dental amalgam has already been banned in several European nations. Well, if we go back, the author does state this. This is a fact, and a fact can definitely be fact-checked, so there's no line of faulty reasoning here because this is just the presentation of a fact. The mercury released from dental amalgam has damaging environmental consequences. Well, this right here is stated, right? The author has some good reasons for this. There's some damaging environmental consequences. It goes directly into sewage. It can be leached into things. So here we have a cause and effect. Wastewater produced goes into these areas. This area gets into the land, groundwater. This groundwater with the mercury has damaging consequences. You can see a clear cause and effect relationship here. But let's look at answer choice D. The mercury that accumulates in the body tissues causes the health problems. And we've got this word causes. Causes is always going to be kind of one of those words to investigate because you want to make sure that what the author is stating actually can be proven from start to finish and that there's not just two things that may be related. Let's look at how the author presents this evidence in the text. Well, the author says some of this mercury is leached out and it's swallowed, and then a little bit of it is absorbed into the tissues. And then the study reports that patients with a higher number of fillings have higher rates of these other occurrences. So the question to ask is, are they sure it's the fillings that are causing this? You know, if you can think of some other reason why people that have more fillings may also have higher rates of these other diseases, what you have found is good evidence for why this line of thought process isn't accurate. This is a line of faulty reasoning. The author is correlating to potentially associated things, but something that's not been proven. There's no proof that links the mercury to these other health problems. The author is saying, well, these people have more fillings. Those same people also have more health problems. I guess it must be the fillings that cause it, but there isn't any proof for that. So that's the line of faulty reasoning in passage number 1. All right. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident and comfortable knowing what to look for as you break down these passages. So in fact, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that right now on your own with this mixed practice passage. So you have 2 passages. We're going to break it up. We're going to follow that method for strategic reasoning. So we're going to read, I'll have you read the first passage map the author's argument. What is the claim? What are the conclusions? What are the pieces of evidence that the author uses? And then we'll look at questions that are just about passage 1. All right, so go ahead and pause the video, take as much time as you need to do a thorough analysis, breaking down that argument for this first passage. You've got this picture right here, as well as some text right there. Take a look. And so Article 1 starts with this picture of both Roosevelt and Truman. And we see here, based on the title, that this is a summary of Truman's 1947 speech. Okay. So what did you identify as the primary argument of Truman's speech? What was the point of view? So here in this first paragraph, they give you a sense of what's happening. So here Truman is addressing the NAACP. You can see here that it says Truman described his efforts and his hopes for the future. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to learn what exactly that means. And in the second paragraph, Truman makes his claim. He makes an assertion right here. So here's another word that's indicating that you've got some sort of claim statement. Americans should repair these racial schisms that are taking place. And he continues with the fact that the government should, there's that word again, should protect and provide for all its people. Americans should possess decent homes, healthcare, etc. So there's the claim that America is ready to do this and that the government should protect all of its citizens. Now we got a contrast. It says, well, Truman didn't just provide a one-sided view, though. There are, in fact, quite a few issues. So here's some evidence for why this needs to be addressed. The author points out that some of the reasons that Truman brings this up is to show that, well, here are some reasons for needing to repair this schism that is being talked about. Okay. Now the author says, well, here's more evidence. So then Truman points out the administrative efforts. So we've got the reason. I'm here to talk to you about the racial systems we need to repair. America's ready. There have been some problems, so that's why it needs to be fixed. Here's some of the efforts that my administration is doing in order to try to repair these. And then we've got another piece of evidence here. This is that adoption of authority or that appeal to authority. Truman cites the United Nations. Truman also cites the First Lady or former First Lady here. Finally, Truman concludes the speech by quoting another authority figure, calling for a united nation. All right, so let's look at some of these questions now that ask just about Truman's argument. So why does Truman mention the United Nations Commission on Human Rights? This is to show what? If we go back to the context of where this has been cited, this is in the paragraph describing the administration's efforts to kind of bring the nation together. And the author says, well, he points out several examples being evidence of the administration's efforts to make improvements, including, there it is, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. So this is evidence to support Truman's claim that he supports civil rights for the United States, both internally as well as abroad. Now we've got the second passage here in this paired passage set. Again, I'm going to give you enough time, pause the video so you take as much time as you need to break down the argument that's here in Article 2. Keep in mind how these two are similar. So what is the uniting theme between Article 1 and Article 2? How do these two differ? And well as what are some of their similarities. And after we do that, we'll take a look at some questions that ask both about Article 2 as well as both articles together. Go ahead, pause the video and unpause when you're ready to continue. Well, this is Eleanor Roosevelt's speech. So we have one from Truman, and now we have one from Eleanor Roosevelt a year later on human rights. So you may already be seeing, well, both of these passages are related in that they both mentioned this particular speech, and they're both about rights of groups of people. So this is Eleanor Roosevelt's speech. That's what we see here in paragraph 6, kind of an introduction to where this is taking place. And here's her claim. So she is informing the audience of her purpose. Her purpose, therefore, being the main point. What is her point of view? What is her reason for giving this speech? And she says it is about preservation of human freedom. Okay, so we know that Eleanor Roosevelt claims that preservation of human freedom is important. Now, what are some of the components of this? What is evidence? And she says, well, there's two components of this. One is that, so here's our first one. Basic rights are given to any individual, And the second is that it's unfinished, but that this is going to be presented to every nation. So she says, here's our two components of this international bill, and here's the intention of this bill. So this bill would be used as. So this is the reason for this bill. It will be used as a reference to shape national laws. Right, so we know what she's talking about, we know why she's talking, and we know the reason that she's talking about this particular bill. Now, we've got some additional information about this here. So here's the intention. It's going to be used as a reference. However, we've got a contrast. In reality, it hasn't been ratified by each nation. In this case, we have a contrast. 4 nations, including the Soviet Union, have abstained from this. So this is anecdotal evidence. This is kind of a story or an anecdote that is providing evidence for a particular component of the argument. In this case, this is showing some of those difficulties. So this is anecdotal evidence about the difficulties of getting this ratified. And now you have another specific example. Here's an example used about the media, drawing a specific example between the Soviet use of media and the American use of media. And here is, again, more of that. So while the US government did not punish, the USSR would. And so the premise here is that the USSR does punish political expressions while the US doesn't. All of this is evidence for the claim that it is, in fact, difficult to get some global understanding of what these human rights are or should be in this 2-part bill. Now, she concludes her speech by repeating her call to action. Remember, a call to action is going to be what the author wants to happen after you read this or after you listen to this. So this is, again, going to be part of that main point of view or that main conclusion. So this call to action is encouraging everyone to approve it. So she's saying, approve this bill. And again, that goes back to the claim that we saw earlier, which is approve this bill because the preservation of human freedom is important. Notice how all of that is support for kind of the same general concept. All right, let's look at some questions now that are just about passage 2. So what approach did she take, or what evidence did she present? What types of evidence did Eleanor Roosevelt use in this speech to encourage people to accept this and to approve it? Well, she provided some anecdotal evidence, and she also provided some examples. And those examples were on this particular issue. She described the difficulties in deciding upon universal definitions. And then we have that anecdotal evidence about the USSR and the US, and we have the example with the media. Right. So her approach here is to acknowledge the difficulties of convincing different nations to agree on common ideas. So that is there clearly illustrated in the text. So let's look at some of these other answer choices. She suggested that nations in a disagreement be removed. Nope, we don't see that anywhere in the text. She never said you should be removed or this nation should be removed. Warned of problems that would occur if. We don't have any hypotheticals here. Now, we may believe that problems would arise or will arise, but Roosevelt doesn't mention these directly in this article. So we don't know about what's going to happen if it's not passed. She's just saying you need to approve it. And compared abstaining nations with the voting nations. In fact, what she compares are 2 of those abstaining nations. And beyond that, the differences were insignificant. She's in fact saying that the differences were quite significant, and that's leading to some of those difficulties.